The sky over Tallyra had always been a canvas of stories. Every evening, the townspeople would gather atop the gentle hills to watch the sun sink behind the violet mountains, painting the clouds in streaks of gold and pink. The stars would slowly appear, twinkling like tiny lanterns in the deepening sky. Children listened to the elders speak of legends, tales whispered for generations, about saviors who would one day fall from the sky when the world needed them most. These saviors were said to bring knowledge, hope, and gifts that would change the course of history. No one had seen them, of course, but the stories were comforting, a secret promise written in the stars. Life in Tallyra was peaceful, almost gentle in its rhythm. People grew their own food in terraced gardens, harvested the sparkling water from crystal-clear rivers, and built homes that seemed to grow naturally from the earth. Even in this serene life, there were struggles, floods in the rainy season, occasional droughts, and the endless search for new ways to make life easier. But the people believed that they could handle these challenges themselves. And yet, deep in their hearts, the legend of the sky-fallen saviors remained a quiet hope, a dream waiting for its moment. It was on one such evening, as the sun touched the horizon and the first stars began to appear, that something extraordinary happened. A sharp streak of light cut across the sky, brighter than any star, moving faster than any bird, and the people stopped in their tracks. Mothers clutched their children. Farmers dropped their tools. Even the animals paused, sensing the strange energy that had entered the air. The light was too perfect, too deliberate, and it was coming straight for the largest field outside the town. In the center of the field, a soft hum began to grow louder, a sound unlike anything the people of Tallyra had heard. It was smooth, melodic, almost musical, as though the air itself was singing. Then, in a sudden, dazzling flash, the light touched the ground. The hum faded, leaving behind a single, sleek craft that seemed to float just above the grass. It was unlike any Tallyran invention. Its surface shimmered with a metallic glow that reflected the colors of the sunset. Lines curved gracefully along its body, suggesting motion even in stillness. And in the quiet center of it all, the hatch slowly opened. Out stepped a figure that no one could have expected. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a calm, steady presence. His skin was fair, his eyes deep and curious, and his hair ruffled slightly in the gentle wind. He wore clothing unlike any the Tallarans had seen, smooth, fitted, and simple, without decoration or pattern, yet somehow elegant in its design. He carried no weapons, no tools, nothing that suggested he intended harm. Yet there was a feeling about him, a quiet authority that made everyone instinctively step back while also wanting to approach. The people whispered among themselves, unsure what to do. Was he a god, a spirit, or the savior the legends had promised? No one moved too close, but no one could resist staring. Slowly, the stranger lifted a hand in greeting, his movements calm and deliberate, as if he wanted to assure them that he meant no harm. The air seemed to hold its breath. After a long pause, he spoke, though the words were not in any language the Tallarans knew. They were soft, musical, and somehow filled with meaning, even if the listeners could not understand. He looked around, his eyes scanning the crowd, and then from his belt he produced a small device. It unfolded into a glowing, three-dimensional map of the stars. Lines and symbols shifted, connecting distant points in ways that made the Tallarans gasp. He gestured to the map, then to the people, and finally to himself, as if trying to explain that he had traveled far from another place entirely. Curiosity began to overcome fear. Children crept closer, their eyes wide with excitement. A few brave adults stepped forward, speaking cautiously, pointing at the map and then at themselves, trying to ask who he was. The stranger listened carefully, nodding and responding with gentle gestures. Then he did something remarkable. He tapped on the map, and a small holographic projection of the town appeared in midair, showing the fields, homes, and river. The Tallarans gasped again. The human had not only come from the sky, but he could also understand their world and explain things about it without even knowing their language. The elders whispered among themselves, debating whether this was truly a savior or something unknown. One elder, a woman named Lyra, stepped forward. Her hair was silver, her eyes sharp, and she had spent her life teaching the stories of the stars. She raised her hand in cautious welcome. The human responded with a bow, a small smile, and a gesture that invited understanding rather than fear. Over the next hours, the human showed them simple tools, using gestures and demonstrations. He could make water flow more smoothly from the river using channels he designed. He could make small lights float above the ground without fire. The Tallarans watched, amazed not only at the inventions but at the way he taught. He did not simply show, He involved them, letting them try and fail, and then guiding them to the solution. Slowly, the initial fear melted into fascination. Night fell, and the sky was filled with stars. Around a small fire that the Tallarans had built for warmth, they gathered to listen as the human continued his silent teaching. He projected constellations, showing how their patterns could help predict the weather, locate water, and understand the cycles of their planet. Children laughed as they tried to touch the glowing shapes, and the adults marveled at the simplicity and wisdom behind his demonstrations. By the time the moon rose high over the hills, the people of Tallyra had begun to believe something they had only dared whisper before. The legends were true. A savior had indeed fallen from the sky. But he was not a god or a spirit. He was human like none they had ever seen, yet so capable, so gentle, so full of knowledge that it felt like magic. Lyra watched him carefully, sensing that this was only the beginning. The human had come not to rule or to demand loyalty, but to teach, to share, and perhaps to remind them of something they had forgotten. That even in a world as peaceful and isolated as Tallyra, there was room to grow, to learn, and to dream beyond the boundaries of their valley. As the first night passed, the human did not sleep in the usual ways. He observed the stars, studied the land, and made small notes in a device that glowed softly in the dark. The Tallarans, too, did not sleep fully, their minds alive with excitement and questions. What did he know? Where had he come from? Could he teach them enough to change their lives? By morning, the story of his arrival had spread throughout the nearby villages. People came cautiously, bringing gifts of fruit, flowers, and water, curious to meet the human who had landed from the sky. He greeted each person with the same calm smile, using gestures and holographic images to explain his peaceful intentions. Everywhere he went, he inspired awe and wonder, not fear. It became clear that he was not just a visitor. He was a teacher, a guide, and perhaps the living embodiment of the legends that had been whispered for centuries. And though no one knew why he had come, the people of Tallyra understood one thing clearly. Life would never be the same again. The human walked among them, observing, learning, and gently guiding. The Tallarans began to see possibilities they had never imagined. Water could be carried more efficiently. Crops could be organized to feed more people. Even the architecture of their homes could be improved without harming the beauty of their environment. Everywhere he touched, curiosity and hope grew like seedlings reaching for the sun. Lyra, standing atop the hill, watched him carefully. She had spent her life telling stories of heroes who came from the sky, but this human was not a story. He was real, and he was here. And in the quiet understanding between them, she realized that Tallyra was on the brink of something extraordinary, a chance to learn from a species that had traveled the stars, a species that could remind them of the potential that lay within their own hearts. As the sun rose higher, the human pointed to the sky and then back at the people, a simple gesture that seemed to say, "The stars are not so far away. You can reach them, too." The Tallarans, young and old alike, felt a surge of hope and excitement. Perhaps the saviors from the legends were not just coming to save them. Perhaps they had come to show them what they were capable of becoming on their own. And in that moment, as the wind rustled through the fields and the river sparkled in the morning light, the people of Tallyra understood something they would never forget. The first human had landed, and with him, the promise of a future filled with wonder, learning, and limitless possibility. The days after the human's arrival were filled with excitement and curiosity. The people of Tallyra could not stop talking about him. Children ran to the fields each morning, hoping to see the tall figure who had fallen from the sky. Adults wandered through the village, pointing out things they had never noticed before, patterns in the clouds, shapes in the mountains, and ways the river's water could flow more smoothly. Everyone wanted to learn from him, though no one fully understood how he could do what he did. The human, who had introduced himself simply as Aaron through gestures and symbols, moved through the villages with patience and quiet determination. He carried with him a device that projected small holograms, showing simple machines, farming methods, and ways to store water without losing it. The Tallarans gathered around him, eager to understand, even though their minds struggled to grasp the foreign ideas. Aaron began by showing them how to carry water more efficiently. The Tallarans were used to lifting heavy jars and walking long distances from the river to their homes. Aaron created small, lightweight carriers that balanced on the shoulder and allowed 2 people to carry 3 times the usual amount. He demonstrated how the carriers worked, and children eagerly tried them, laughing as they stumbled and then learned to balance the jars. Even the elders smiled, impressed by the simplicity and effectiveness of his design. Next, he showed them a way to collect sunlight to help grow plants in places where the soil was thin. Using small reflective panels and careful placement, he demonstrated how to direct sunlight to areas that received less warmth during the day. The Tallarans watched in amazement as tiny seedlings began to flourish in the shaded areas, where before nothing would grow. Farmers began to see that the land could produce more food than they had imagined. Aaron never commanded the people to do anything. Instead, he demonstrated and then let them try. When a child knocked over a water carrier or a farmer misaligned a sunlight panel, Aaron would simply shake his head with a small smile and show them again. He encouraged them to experiment, to find the best way for their own hands, their own minds. Slowly, the villagers began to see that learning was not just about copying. It was about understanding, observing, and improving. Even the animals seemed to sense the change in the village. Birds that had once kept their distance began to land near Aaron as he worked. Dogs and cats followed him through the fields. The children laughed as the animals sniffed the floating panels and water carriers, as if approving of the new inventions. There was a harmony in the village that had not existed before. The people worked together, shared ideas, and discovered joy in helping one another in ways that were entirely new. Aaron also began teaching the people about patterns. He drew shapes in the dirt with sticks and showed them how the patterns could predict the weather. Lines and circles became maps of the stars, which the Tallarans had admired for generations but never fully understood. Through his simple drawings and gestures, he showed how the cycles of the sun and moon affected the rivers, the rains, and the growth of crops. Slowly, the people began to understand the connection between the sky and the land, seeing the patterns in the stars reflected in the world around them. The elders, especially Lyra, were fascinated. She had spent her life telling the stories of sky-fallen saviors, but now she was witnessing one in her own time. Yet she noticed something unusual. Aaron did not speak, yet he communicated more clearly than anyone she had known. It was as if understanding did not require words, only patience, observation, and attention. Lyra began to realize that he was teaching more than just inventions. He was teaching them a way to think, to explore, and to grow. Not all lessons were simple. One afternoon, he gathered a group near the riverbank to show them how to purify water. He placed a series of tubes and containers, using natural materials and clever design to remove impurities. The villagers watched with wide eyes, not fully understanding at first. When they tried it themselves, some made mistakes. Water spilled and small clouds of dust rose from the dry riverbanks. But Aaron remained calm, guiding them with gentle gestures and encouraging smiles. By the end of the day, every family could produce clean water for their homes. They celebrated quietly, proud of what they had accomplished without anyone forcing them. As days turned into weeks, Aaron's influence grew. The villagers began to organize themselves in new ways. Children who had once wandered aimlessly after school now helped in the fields, learning both traditional Tallaran methods and the new ones introduced by Aaron. Adults held discussions about how to use the new inventions to improve their villages. They began to plan together, realizing that knowledge shared was more powerful than knowledge kept secret. The village began to change in small but meaningful ways. Pathways became smoother and safer. Gardens grew more abundant. Water flowed to areas that had been dry for years. People were healthier and happier, not because they had been given gifts, but because they had learned to create them for themselves. The harmony between humans, nature, and learning became evident in everything they did. Aaron, for his part, watched quietly. He studied the people, the land, and the sky. Sometimes he would pause to observe a pattern in the clouds, a shift in the river's current, or the way the sunlight hit a field. He made small adjustments to his demonstrations, always finding the simplest, most natural way to show the Tallarans what could be done. He never demanded attention, never insisted on following him, yet the people followed willingly, drawn by the calm confidence he projected. One evening, Lyra approached him while the sun dipped behind the mountains. She had been thinking about the old stories, about the sky-fallen saviors, and about the promise of knowledge and hope. She gestured toward the hills, the river, and the people working together. Then she pointed at him and finally at the stars. She wanted to ask why he had come, where he had traveled from, and how he knew so much. Aaron looked at her, and though he did not speak, he reached out to a small device and projected a simple image. Stars connected by lines appeared above the village, showing distant worlds, far-off skies, and paths of light that seemed to stretch forever. Then he touched the ground, showing the village, the fields, and the people. Finally, he made a small gesture of offering, as if saying that all this knowledge was meant to help them grow and thrive. Lyra understood. She nodded slowly, feeling a deep sense of respect and gratitude. The legends had spoken of saviors falling from the sky, but this was different. Aaron was not here to take or demand. He was here to give, to teach, and to help the people discover their own potential. The hope in her heart grew stronger, and she realized that this human had not only arrived, but had already begun to change everything. The children of the village were particularly fascinated by Aaron. They would follow him as he moved through the fields, asking questions with bright eyes and eager hands. They learned to construct simple tools, to understand the flow of water, and to observe the world with careful attention. Aaron encouraged them to experiment, to make mistakes, and to find solutions on their own. In this way, the children were learning not just practical skills, but curiosity, creativity, and confidence. As the sun rose each morning, the village became a place of quiet excitement. People worked together, sharing ideas and observing the results. Farmers experimented with sunlight panels, children experimented with water carriers, and elders experimented with new ways to organize the community. The village became a living classroom, where learning was joyful and collaborative, guided by the gentle presence of the human who had fallen from the sky. Even neighboring villages began to take notice. Travelers came to see the changes, to learn the new methods, and to meet the human who had inspired such transformation. Aaron welcomed them all, sharing knowledge freely and encouraging them to return to their own homes to teach others. Slowly, the influence of his presence began to spread beyond the first village, reaching more people and planting seeds of hope and learning in distant places. Yet Aaron never sought recognition. He did not ask for thanks or praise. He worked quietly, observing, teaching, and learning from the people of Tal Lyra as much as they learned from him. There was a humility in his actions that impressed everyone who met him. He did not see himself as a hero. He saw himself as a guide, a teacher, and a partner in discovery. By the end of the second week, the people of Tal Lyra had achieved something remarkable. They were no longer passive observers of their own world. They had begun to understand the principles behind the tools and methods Aaron had introduced. They could experiment, adjust, and improve on their own. The village was thriving in ways that had seemed impossible only days before. And through it all, Aaron remained at their side, not as a ruler or a master, but as a gentle presence, guiding them toward knowledge and confidence. As the sun set on the second week of Aaron's stay, the people of Tal Lyra gathered once more on the hills to watch the stars. The children pointed out the constellations he had taught them. Farmers spoke of the new ways they had discovered to grow food. Elders shared their observations and questions, and Aaron listened, nodding, smiling, and encouraging them to continue exploring. Lyra stood at the edge of the hill, looking at the human who had changed their lives so quietly, so profoundly. She realized that the legends had been right in one sense. A savior had come from the sky. But the real magic, she understood, was not in his arrival alone. It was in what he had inspired in the hearts and minds of the people, in their willingness to learn, experiment, and grow. And in that moment, under the twinkling stars of Tal Lyra, the village knew that the first human had not only landed, it had sparked a transformation that would last for generations. The mornings on Tal Lyra had begun to feel different since the human, Aaron, had arrived. Birds sang in patterns the villagers had never noticed before, and the river glimmered with a strange brilliance under the rising sun. Children ran to meet Aaron at the edge of the village, eager to show the new skills they had learned, while adults quietly observed the ways the land seemed to respond to the small changes he had introduced. The village had grown brighter, more organized, and more alive, but the people still carried the gentle anxiety that had always existed beneath their calm routine. Life, after all, was not without its trials. One morning, as the first rays of sunlight stretched across the mountains, a low rumble shook the village. At first it was subtle, almost like the distant growl of a storm, but within minutes it became stronger. Clouds gathered quickly over the valley, darker and heavier than any the villagers had seen in recent memory. The river began to rise, its sparkling surface turning turbulent and foamy. Farmers shouted to each other, trying to move supplies and protect their crops, but panic began to ripple through the village. The people had never faced such a sudden storm, and their usual methods of dealing with floods seemed inadequate. Aaron stood at the center of the village, observing carefully. He did not shout or panic. Instead, he raised his hand to signal calm, then used his device to project the terrain of the village and the surrounding riverbanks. Lines and points shimmered in the hologram, showing how the water would flow if left unchecked. The villagers gathered around, their eyes wide, realizing that the storm was serious and that this time ordinary methods might not be enough. He gestured to the villagers, dividing them into small groups. One group would carry sand and soil to reinforce the banks. Another would gather stones and wooden beams to build temporary barriers. He showed them, through gestures and visual instructions, how to place these barriers so that water would be redirected safely into overflow channels he marked in the projection. The villagers followed as best they could, though many were unsure if their efforts would succeed. Children, usually reserved during such serious work, ran alongside the adults carrying small stones and filling baskets with soil. Aaron walked among them, gently guiding hands, adjusting placements, and giving encouraging nods. His calm presence had a way of making the impossible seem possible. Even the elders, some of whom had lived for decades without ever seeing a storm of this size, worked with renewed hope and determination, inspired by the methodical way he approached the crisis. The rain began to fall in earnest, drumming on rooftops and forming small rivers along the streets. The river swelled, threatening the fields and lower homes. The villagers worked tirelessly, stacking stones, digging channels, and reinforcing banks. Aaron demonstrated again and again, showing how a small adjustment here or there could change the flow of water dramatically. Slowly, the tide began to respond. Channels carried the water away from the homes, and barriers diverted the strongest currents. By midday, the storm had reached its peak. The sky was a rolling mass of gray and silver clouds, wind tugging at trees and banners. Yet the village, under Aaron's guidance, held strong. No home was swept away. No one was trapped or hurt. Instead, the villagers moved as a single, coordinated group, each person aware of their role and empowered to act with confidence. Children even helped signal areas that needed more attention, and adults followed their suggestions with trust and patience. During the height of the storm, Aaron paused to observe the river from a safe distance. He noticed a natural break in the far bank that could cause flooding if not reinforced. He quickly sketched a simple solution in the dirt and showed it to a group of villagers. They understood immediately and worked quickly to implement the fix. Water that would have flooded the village instead flowed safely along the channel he had created. The people cheered softly as they realized their efforts, guided by Aaron's calm instruction, were succeeding. By late afternoon, the storm began to ease. The clouds thinned, and the rain became a gentle drizzle. The villagers gathered to see the results of their work. Where chaos might have been, there was order. Where fear might have reigned, there was triumph. Children clapped their hands, splashing in the shallow pools left behind by the retreating water. Adults laughed with relief, pointing out the ways in which their collective effort had succeeded. Even the animals, who had hidden during the worst of the storm, emerged to explore the transformed landscape. Aaron walked among them, smiling quietly. He did not take credit, but the people could feel his pride. The lessons had been more than about building barriers or redirecting water. They had been about teamwork, observation, patience, and the power of learning together. The villagers realized that their confidence had grown, and with it, their ability to face challenges that once would have seemed insurmountable. As evening fell, the sky cleared to reveal a brilliant sunset. The colors reflected in the puddles and wet fields, painting the village in gold, pink, and violet. Lyra gathered the people at the top of the hill, as she often did, and encouraged them to look at what they had accomplished. They saw the channels, the reinforced banks, the ways the water had been guided safely through the village. It was proof that knowledge and careful planning could protect them from forces beyond their control. Children ran ahead, pointing to new seedlings that had survived the storm thanks to the protective barriers. Farmers checked their fields and discovered that the crops had endured. The villagers laughed and shared stories of how they had worked together, praising one another for their quick thinking and courage. Even those who had doubted their ability to manage the crisis found themselves amazed at what they could accomplish when guided and supported. Aaron did not speak, but his gestures showed that he wanted them to reflect on the experience. He drew patterns in the dirt, connecting the storm, the river, the land, and the actions of the people. The villagers began to see the relationships between cause and effect, realizing that even in nature's fury, thoughtful preparation and cooperation could make the difference. It was a lesson that went far beyond any single storm. It was a lesson about life, about community, and about the potential of human creativity and intelligence. Over the next several days, the villagers continued to strengthen the channels and reinforce the banks. They added small innovations of their own, inspired by Aaron's methods. A farmer created a system of small gates that could be opened or closed to control water flow more precisely. A group of children experimented with floating markers that showed the depth of the river, making it easier to predict changes during future storms. Aaron encouraged each experiment, praising effort and curiosity, and showing how small improvements could have big effects. Word of the storm and the villagers' success spread to neighboring areas. Travelers came to see the techniques that had saved the village, and Aaron welcomed them with the same calm patience he showed to everyone. He demonstrated the methods again, guiding the visitors to understand the principles rather than simply handing over solutions. The visiting villagers were inspired, realizing that they could take these ideas back to their own communities and adapt them to their land. Through the storm and its aftermath, the people of Talira learned a profound truth. Knowledge was not just about tools or techniques. It was about understanding, observing, and applying what they had learned in creative ways. Aaron had taught them to see the world differently, to notice patterns, and to act thoughtfully rather than reactively. The storm, once a cause of fear, had become a teacher, showing them what they could achieve together. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant orange and red, the villagers gathered once more on the hill. Children pointed out the stars that Aaron had taught them to recognize. Adults spoke of new methods they wanted to try, and elders reflected on the lessons of patience, planning, and cooperation. Aaron projected a final image of the village in the hologram, showing the flow of water and the placement of barriers. The villagers nodded with understanding, proud of what they had accomplished and eager to continue learning. Lyra, standing beside Aaron, realized that the storm had done more than test the village. It had transformed it. The people had faced fear and uncertainty, and instead of being defeated, they had risen to the challenge. They had worked together, learned from mistakes, and applied knowledge in ways that even she had not imagined possible. The village was stronger, wiser, and more confident than ever before. And Aaron, the first human to fall from the sky, had not done it alone. He had guided, encouraged, and inspired, but the true power had come from the people themselves. They had discovered that they were capable of more than they had ever believed, and that knowledge, when shared and applied thoughtfully, could turn even the most threatening storm into an opportunity for growth. As the night settled over Talira, the villagers returned to their homes, their hearts light with pride and hope. The river flowed calmly, the fields stood resilient, and the sky sparkled with stars that seemed to shine just a little brighter. Aaron watched quietly from the edge of the village, noting the small changes, the careful planning, and the joy that now filled the people's hearts. He knew that this experience had not only taught them about floods and rivers, but about themselves, their curiosity, their intelligence, and their ability to work together to face any challenge. For the first time, the legends of the sky-fallen savior felt more real than ever, not because of the human alone, but because of what he had inspired within the people of Talira. And in that quiet understanding, the village slept peacefully, ready for the challenges and wonders that tomorrow would bring. The days after the great storm were filled with a quiet energy that spread through Talira like sunlight over the hills. The villagers moved with a sense of purpose they had never known before. Every path, every field, and every home seemed alive with possibility. The work that had saved the village from disaster had not only protected them, but had also opened their eyes to what they could achieve together. Children laughed as they tested new tools, farmers experimented with improved irrigation, and elders shared their observations and discoveries. Everywhere, people were learning, teaching, and discovering in ways that felt like magic. Aaron walked through the village, observing the changes with satisfaction. He did not need to speak to show pride. The villagers could see it in the quiet encouragement of his gestures, the gentle nods, and the way he paused to watch them work. He had taught them not just how to solve problems, but how to notice them, understand them, and approach them with calm and thoughtful minds. Every smile, every small success was proof that the lessons were taking root. One morning, a group of travelers arrived from a distant village across the hills. They had heard of the human who had fallen from the sky and the village that had survived the storm. Their eyes were wide with curiosity and excitement as they approached Talira, carrying small gifts of food and woven baskets. Aaron greeted them with the same calm and welcoming presence he showed to all who came. Without words, he gestured to the villagers, encouraging them to share what they had learned. The visiting villagers observed with awe as the people of Talira demonstrated the techniques they had developed under Aaron's guidance. Children explained how to balance water carriers, adults showed how sunlight panels could help plants grow in shaded areas, and elders described the channels that redirected the river safely during the storm. The travelers were amazed not only by the tools and methods, but by the confidence and understanding of the villagers. It was clear that they had not merely copied instructions, they had learned, experimented, and adapted. Aaron projected a holographic map of the region, showing the nearby hills, rivers, and villages. He pointed to the distant settlements, and then to Talira, suggesting that the lessons learned here could help many others. The visitors nodded eagerly, understanding that they could take these ideas back to their own homes. Aaron then demonstrated a few simple tools and techniques that were easy to replicate, showing how knowledge could travel and grow. The visitors stayed for several days, learning from the villagers and sharing their own methods in return. Some had ideas about planting new crops, collecting water, or building safer homes. The exchange of knowledge created a vibrant energy throughout the village. Aaron encouraged every experiment, praising creativity and patience. He made no distinction between the newcomers and the original villagers, showing that learning and cooperation were universal and could cross any boundary. Word of the transformation in Talira began to spread further. Villages that had once struggled in isolation sent representatives to learn from Aaron and the villagers. Every new group brought fresh ideas, and every visit created opportunities for innovation. Together, the people began to form a network of knowledge, a community not limited by geography but connected through curiosity, cooperation, and shared experience. Aaron continued to guide quietly, never imposing, never commanding. His presence was gentle but powerful, showing the villagers how to observe patterns, think critically, and test solutions. The villagers began to apply these principles not just to farming and water, but to every part of life. They built stronger homes using locally available materials, designed pathways that prevented erosion, and created tools that made everyday tasks easier. Children experimented with new methods of measurement and counting, turning play into learning. Elders contributed wisdom and experience, helping the younger generations understand the importance of planning and patience. As weeks passed, the village became a center of learning for the entire region. People from neighboring hills brought questions and challenges, and the villagers met them with confidence and creativity. Aaron had shown them how to think, not just what to do, and that lesson was spreading like a gentle wind. Every successful solution inspired another, and the sense of possibility grew stronger with each passing day. One morning, Aaron called a gathering at the central square. The villagers and visitors assembled, curious to see what he would show next. He projected a large holographic display of Talira and the surrounding villages. Lines connected the settlements, showing paths, water sources, and fields. Then he gestured toward the distant villages, encouraging the people of Talira to share their knowledge and guide the newcomers. The villagers understood immediately. They had learned enough to teach, and teaching would help them learn even more. Groups formed quickly, each led by villagers who had excelled in a particular skill. Some led others in building stronger irrigation channels, while others shared knowledge about sunlight panels and crop rotation. Children guided their peers in using simple tools, and elders explained the reasoning behind each method. The visitors who had come seeking knowledge were now active participants in a growing community of learning and cooperation. Aaron observed from the edge of the square, his face calm and eyes bright. He had come from the sky, but he had never intended to rule or control. His purpose was to inspire, guide, and ignite curiosity, and it was working. The people of Talira were no longer waiting for guidance. They were thinking, experimenting, and helping others. His presence had sparked something far greater than inventions or methods. It had awakened the spirit of learning and the joy of discovery. By afternoon, the groups had begun to work on joint projects. Paths between villages were improved to allow easier travel and communication. Water channels were extended to areas that had once remained dry. Simple machines for lifting and transporting goods were shared and replicated across multiple villages. Even small innovations, like ways to keep food fresh longer or store seeds for future planting, spread quickly. Every success was celebrated, not as a gift from Aaron, but as a product of their combined effort, guided by the lessons he had taught. At sunset, Lyra walked among the villagers, observing the energy and excitement that filled the square. Children chattered eagerly about the experiments they had tried, adults exchanged tips, and elders smiled, seeing the younger generations taking responsibility and making decisions confidently. She thought of the old legends of saviors falling from the sky and realized that the truth was even more remarkable. The human who had landed in Talira had not only brought knowledge, he had shown them the power within themselves. Aaron stood beside her, pointing toward the hills where more villages could be seen. He gestured toward the horizon, then back at the people, showing that learning and sharing could extend far beyond this valley. The villagers understood. Their work, their discoveries, and their growing confidence were not limited to Talira. They could reach the surrounding region, helping others to grow and thrive as well. In the days that followed, the network of learning expanded rapidly. Villages that had once been isolated began to communicate, share ideas, and collaborate. Simple tools and techniques spread quickly, adapted to local needs and environments. Children traveled with adults to neighboring villages, teaching what they had learned and learning new skills in return. Adults exchanged observations about crops, weather, and building methods, improving practices through trial and shared experience. Even elders, who had once thought the world was too vast to influence, found themselves contributing wisdom and guidance to a growing community. Through it all, Aaron remained a calm presence, always observing, gently guiding, and encouraging curiosity. He showed the villagers that mistakes were not failures but opportunities to learn. Every experiment, whether successful or not, was valuable because it taught a lesson and inspired new ideas. His teaching was not about control or authority, it was about empowerment, inspiring the people to think, create, and share. As weeks turned into months, the villages of the region began to change. Crops flourished, water was managed effectively, and paths between settlements allowed for easy communication and collaboration. Knowledge and creativity became a shared resource, passed freely from one village to another. People began to see themselves not just as villagers, but as part of a larger, connected community capable of growth, innovation, and resilience. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains and the stars began to appear, the villagers of Talira gathered once more on the hilltop. They looked out over the valley, where distant villages glowed with the light of activity and learning. Children pointed excitedly to the constellations Aaron had taught them, adults shared ideas they had adapted for their own homes, and elders reflected on the remarkable transformation that had taken place. Aaron projected a final display in the air, showing the villages, the paths, the water channels, and the new innovations. The villagers watched, understanding that they were no longer just recipients of knowledge. They were teachers, learners, and explorers. The network of villages had become a living testament to what could be achieved when curiosity, cooperation, and careful observation were combined. Lyra stood beside Aaron, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and hope. The legends of saviors falling from the sky had spoken of heroes who would appear in times of need, but the true gift had been the awakening of potential within the people themselves. Aaron had shown them that the power to create, to improve, and to connect was already within their hands. It only needed guidance, patience, and the courage to try. As night settled over Talira, the stars shone brighter than ever, reflected in the eyes of children, the faces of adults, and the hearts of elders. The human who had fallen from the sky had not only changed one village, he had sparked a transformation that would ripple across the region, inspiring generations to come. And in the quiet glow of the evening, as the villagers returned to their homes, they carried with them the knowledge, confidence, and hope that would guide them toward a future filled with discovery, learning, and endless possibility. The village of Talira had never felt so alive. Months had passed since Aaron, the human who had fallen from the sky, had first arrived. What had begun as quiet curiosity had grown into a vibrant community of learners, teachers, and innovators. Fields flourished with crops that had once struggled in shade or poor soil. Water flowed safely through channels and barriers designed by the villagers themselves. Children moved through the village with curiosity in their eyes, experimenting, learning, and teaching each other. Adults shared ideas and discoveries, building upon the lessons Aaron had introduced, and elders, once hesitant about change, now guided projects and inspired younger generations with their wisdom. Aaron observed all of this with quiet satisfaction. He had come to Talira with no plan beyond teaching and inspiring, and yet the transformation was remarkable. He walked through the village paths, watching children adjust sunlight panels, farmers organize seeds, and neighbors collaborate on improving irrigation systems. Every person seemed to understand not just the how of what they were doing, but the why. Knowledge had taken root in a way that no single lesson could have achieved alone. One morning, Aaron called the villagers together in the central square. The sun had just risen, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. The villagers gathered with a mixture of excitement and curiosity. Even the children, who had grown used to Aaron's presence, felt a strange anticipation. Aaron projected a large holographic display into the air, showing the village, the fields, and the surrounding hills. Then he gestured to the sky, to the stars, and back to the village. Lyra, standing among the elders, understood immediately. Aaron was preparing them for his departure. Though the thought filled her heart with a quiet sadness, she felt pride as well. The villagers had grown, learned, and discovered the strength that lay within themselves. The human had not come to stay, but to spark something greater, the realization that the future was theirs to shape. Aaron spent the morning reviewing the lessons he had shared. He demonstrated once more how to use the water channels efficiently, how to adjust sunlight panels for maximum growth, and how to measure and test soil for better planting. Children gathered around, eager to show what they had learned, and he responded with encouraging nods and gestures. Adults tested new designs and shared their adaptations. The elders added their insights, refining techniques and making small improvements. Every exchange was a celebration of curiosity, creativity, and collaboration. Then Aaron revealed a new gift. From his device, he projected a compact archive of knowledge. It contained holographic guides to practical skills, instructions for experiments, and visual explanations of principles that could be applied to farming, building, water management, and observation of nature. Unlike the lessons he had demonstrated personally, this archive could be accessed at any time, allowing the villagers to continue learning long after he had gone. The villagers approached the holographic library with awe. Children reached out, touching the images as if they were solid objects, while adults examined diagrams and methods that they had only glimpsed before. Aaron gestured to them, showing that the archive was theirs to explore, expand, and share. It was not a gift to be kept. It was a tool for growth, meant to inspire future discoveries and innovations. Over the next few days, the villagers practiced using the archive, experimenting with the techniques and ideas it contained. They discovered ways to improve their tools, refine their water channels, and grow crops more efficiently. Each discovery was celebrated, but the excitement was quiet and thoughtful, a shared understanding that the power of knowledge was in exploration, creativity, and cooperation. Aaron encouraged them with gentle gestures, pointing out connections and possibilities without dictating outcomes. Meanwhile, the surrounding villages continued to visit, learning from Lyra and sharing their own ideas. The network of knowledge had grown stronger than ever. Paths between villages were improved, travelers exchanged discoveries, and children moved freely between communities, teaching and learning with excitement. The entire region was becoming a place of curiosity, cooperation, and creativity. Aaron observed this quietly, feeling the deep satisfaction of seeing his guidance take root and multiply. One afternoon, Aaron took Lyra aside and gestured toward the horizon. He pointed to the distant hills, the rivers, and the stars beyond. He wanted her to understand that his journey was not over, and that he would leave Lyra soon to continue traveling and sharing knowledge elsewhere. Lyra nodded, understanding without words. She felt a mixture of gratitude and sadness, but more than anything, she felt pride. The villagers were ready. They could continue learning, teaching, and growing without him. Aaron spent his final days in Lyra observing, guiding, and celebrating. He walked through the fields with children, helping them adjust sunlight panels and water carriers. He worked with farmers to test small improvements in crop rotation. He shared quiet moments with elders, discussing ideas for strengthening the village and expanding knowledge. Every interaction was gentle, deliberate, and filled with purpose. He did not rush, for he knew that the lessons he had taught were not about speed, but about understanding, patience, and curiosity. On the morning of his departure, the villagers gathered at the edge of the main field. Children ran ahead, waving excitedly, while adults and elders formed a circle, standing proudly with their heads held high. The village was alive with energy, creativity, and confidence. Every corner reflected the work they had done, the lessons they had learned, and the discoveries they had made. Aaron stood at the center, observing the faces around him. He had come from the sky, and now he would leave them to reach even greater heights. He projected the final image from his device: the village, the surrounding hills, the water channels, and the fields. Lines connected distant villages, showing paths of knowledge and cooperation. The villagers understood immediately. They had the power to continue this work, to teach others, and to expand the network of learning even further. The image shimmered and then faded, leaving only the memory of what had been shared and the understanding of what could be achieved. Lyra stepped forward and placed her hand gently on Aaron's shoulder. She did not speak, but her eyes conveyed gratitude, respect, and a quiet promise to continue his work. Aaron smiled softly, acknowledging her words without speaking. The villagers, too, understood that their time with him had come to an end, but that the lessons, tools, and spirit of curiosity he had instilled would stay with them forever. As the sun rose higher, Aaron prepared his craft. It shimmered in the morning light, reflecting the village and the surrounding hills. The children ran forward, waving excitedly, while adults offered quiet nods and smiles. Aaron gestured to each group, acknowledging their growth, effort, and creativity. Then, with a gentle hum, the craft lifted off the ground, floating silently above the village. The people watched in awe as it ascended, shrinking against the backdrop of the mountains and the sky. Even as Aaron disappeared into the distance, the village felt his presence in every field, every channel, every panel, and every face. The knowledge he had shared, the confidence he had inspired, and the curiosity he had awakened were woven into the life of the village. Children ran and played, experimenting with what they had learned. Adults discussed improvements and shared ideas. Elders guided and observed, proud of the accomplishments and eager to see the next generation thrive. As night fell, the villagers gathered on the hilltop once more. Stars twinkled overhead, brighter than ever, and the air was filled with the quiet hum of discovery and cooperation. Children pointed out constellations, recounting the stories and lessons Aaron had taught them. Adults shared observations, discussed new ideas, and celebrated the knowledge that had been gained. Elders reflected on the journey they had witnessed, understanding that the true power of the human who had fallen from the sky was not in what he brought, but in what he inspired. Lyra stood at the edge of the hill, looking out over the village and the surrounding region. She thought of the legends she had told as a child, the tales of saviors falling from the sky, and realized that the truth was even more remarkable. Aaron had not arrived as a conqueror, a ruler, or a god. He had come to teach, guide, and inspire. And in doing so, he had shown the villagers of Tallyra the greatest lesson of all, that knowledge, curiosity, and cooperation were gifts they could carry within themselves forever. The village was no longer just a collection of homes and fields. It was a living, breathing community of learners and creators, connected to neighboring villages and filled with hope. The network of knowledge, begun with the fall of one human from the sky, would continue to grow, spreading ideas, techniques, and inspiration across the region. And every person in Tallyra knew that they were part of something greater than themselves, a legacy of learning, discovery, and cooperation that would endure for generations. In the quiet of the night, with stars shining brightly above, the villagers of Tallyra felt a deep sense of peace. They had faced challenges, learned new skills, and discovered the strength within themselves. They had worked together, shared knowledge, and embraced curiosity. And though the human who had come from the sky had gone, his influence remained in every corner of the village, in every mind eager to learn, and in every hand ready to create. The first human had landed, and in doing so, he had left a legacy that would shape Tallyra and the surrounding region for generations to come. The villagers looked up at the stars, their eyes filled with wonder and hope, knowing that the world was full of possibilities, and that one day they too might share their knowledge, their creativity, and their spirit with another place in need. And so, under the gentle glow of the stars, Tallyra slept peacefully, a village transformed by curiosity, learning, and the quiet, unwavering guidance of the human who had fallen from the sky. The stories of saviors from the stars were no longer just legends. They were real, alive in the hearts and minds of the people, and destined to inspire the generations yet to come.